It's our lesson 3, Geography Form 3. Geography Form 3, topic is external and forming processes. Still the subtopic is action of wind and water in arid areas. We have been covering this lesson this topic for the last 2 lessons. So today we are going, in our last lesson, we looked at classification of deserts, and we said the deserts are classified into 3. One, according to their location, according to temperatures experienced in them, and also according to the nature of the surface. Now, we looked at according to the nature of the surface, and we saw we have 3 types of desert: the sandy, the rocky, and the stony desert. We also looked at the types of deserts according to temperatures. According to temperatures, we said we have the cold and the hot deserts. We stopped at classification of deserts according to their location, where in our last lesson we said that deserts, according to location, we have 2 types of deserts. We have the continental desert and the west coast desert. We mentioned the continental deserts, and we said these are the deserts that are found in the interior of the continents. We never gave the examples. We are going to give the examples today, and then we look at the west coast deserts. Now we have classification of deserts according to location. And classification of deserts according to location, we say number 1, we have the continental deserts. And number 2, we have the west coasts. These ones we say they are found at the interior of the continents. They are found at the interior of the continents. They can either be cold or hot deserts, depending on their longitudinal location. Now, those that are found in the tropics, those that are found on the tropics, they are hot. Those that are found the tropics, when we talk of tropics, we know where we have the tropics, that is along the equatorial region. And the example of this is the Sahara. We have the Sahara deserts. It's an example of continental desert found along the tropics, and it is a hot desert. We also have the Arabian. It's another example of continental deserts which are found along the tropics, and they are hot. So we also have those that are cold. That is, those that are found in the polar region and also in the temperate region. Those that are found in the temperate region, we say they are cold. Examples of continental deserts that are found in the temperate and the polar region, they are cold. As we all know, as we move towards the polar region, temperatures are reducing. And the examples of those deserts is the Gobi deserts. Example is the Gobi deserts. The Gobi deserts found in Central Asia. We also have Gobi desert found in the Central Asia. Now, you can get other examples of these continental deserts that are found in the temperate and the polar region. Now, having looked at the classification of desert and the type of desert, we are now going to look at the action of wind in arid areas. We are going to look at the action of wind in arid areas. If you remember very well in our last lessons, when we were covering the topic of action of rivers. We also looked at the action of river, and we said the work of the river is to erode, to transport, and finally to deposit. The same case with the desert. The action of wind in the desert is to erode. Action of wind in the desert. The action of wind in the desert, just like in the rivers, one is erosion. That is the work of the wind in the desert, to erode. Number two, it is to transport. After eroding, the wind transports the materials it has eroded using different processes that we are going to discuss in our later lessons. And then finally, the work of the wind in the desert is to deposit. Now, those are the actions of the wind in the desert. The work of the wind in the desert is to erode, to transport, and finally to deposit the materials it has transported. And as a result of these three, it leads to formation of different features, as we will be discussing later. The features that are formed due to wind erosion, features that are formed due to wind deposition, but the wind transportation, there are no features that are formed as a result of wind transport. Now, having said that, we are going to look at the processes of wind erosion. We are going to look at the processes of wind erosion. Processes of wind erosion. Processes of wind erosion. Now, these are the same processes we discussed under rivers. We say the rivers they erode through abrasion, corrosion, if you can remember, and they are the same processes that carry out erosion in the desert. The first one is called abrasion. Abrasion is the first process of wind erosion. The first process of wind erosion. We also have deflation. And we have attrition. Now, we found these processes when we were discussing the topic of action of rivers. Abrasion in wind. This is the friction erosion caused by the materials. Now, remember, as the wind is blowing, it is carrying with it some materials. And as these materials are being blown, they are also scrubbing the ground. And as they scrub the ground, the rocks that are resistance, they are broken down. And that process is the one we are calling what? Abrasion. The materials, or rather the load that is carried by the wind, as it is carried with the wind by the wind, it is scrubbing the ground and smoothing the rocks, and also breaking the rocks into small fragments. Now we have the other one, which is deflation. Now the second one is deflation. And this process is where loosened and consolidated materials are blown away by the wind. Remember, in the desert, the land is bare, there are no vegetation, so the materials are exposed, or rather the land or the surface is exposed to denudation and other weathering processes. So the materials are weak, else when the wind is blowing, it blows away those materials, leaving the ground exposed to further denudation processes. And then lastly is attrition. Now when you talk of attrition, the materials that are carried by the wind, as they are blown, they go hitting against each other, and as they hit against each other, they are reducing in size. They are reducing in size, just like the one we discussed under river. So those are the three processes of wind erosion in the desert. So during our next lesson, we are going to look at the features that are formed as a result of wind erosion. So thank you very much. Let's meet again during our next lesson.
Nice one.